Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. All right, your New York Giants have two preseason games in the books now after Saturday's 28-10 loss to the Houston Texans. We have roster cuts coming up in another week. We have roster competitions to talk about, Daniel Jones to talk about, a somewhat functional offensive line to talk about, and a whole lot more, I'm sure, in regards to your Giants. And here to help me do that is Big Blue View's Tony DelGenio. Tony, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks, Ed.
So we saw the debut of Daniel Jones on Saturday, and it wasn't exactly clean. It didn't start well at all. An ugly throw, I think, was the very first throw to Malik Neighbors that almost got picked off. A pick six, which was a really, really ugly pick six, from his own end zone. And then another, another interception later on a deep shot where maybe his biggest mistake was challenging Derek Stingley, but he played better after that. And let me start with, before I get into my own thoughts on Jones, just your thoughts on his day on Saturday, and really not just the day, but how important any of the results actually are.
So the actual results are not all that important when taken in isolation, but they can be important going into the future depending on what he does with them and how he reacts to them and responds to them. The fact is that last year he got off to a terrible start and really never seemed to recover from it. I thought, I could see the effects of the Dallas game even in the Arizona game in the first half, and I think he and the entire team maybe were shell shocked. So, what I'll say about this game against Houston is that his bad start was only as long as the first quarter, and then they got into the second quarter and he started to make some good throws. And so quarterbacks through all of football history have had games where they get off to terrible starts and then they get better as time goes on. And so I hope he left the game thinking, okay, I kind of settled down and got it, got my rhythm a little bit and got used to being on a football team on a football field with live guys coming at me trying to tackle me and so on, and that from here on out he'll be a little bit more comfortable with his starts, and he'll think about the stupid things that he did on the field, and get used maybe to the speed of the game again. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a professional athlete. I don't know what it's like, but I have to guess that you can scrimmage, you can practice with your teammates all you want, but until you get into a live game with the enemy actually coming at you and with freedom to do anything, with defensive backs who are really good playing their best against your receivers, it takes you a while to realize, to get used to the speed of the game and what's happening. So in isolation, I'm not too worried about it. If he comes out the next time he's on the field, whether that's against the Jets next week or whether that's in game one against Minnesota, and starts doing similar things and it becomes a habit, then I start to get worried.
It's interesting, Tony, because I don't want to make an excuse for Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones is entering his sixth year in the NFL. We know he's had an up and down career. We know that under Brian Daboll, he had a good 2022 where he didn't make those kinds of mistakes, had the lowest interception percentage in the NFL. He was horrific last year before he got hurt. We know that. Dable was asked on Sunday during our conference call with him. He was asked about that, and he said, those things happen. But you look through the history of the NFL, every quarterback has made horrific decisions somewhere along the way. I think you and I were looking at some numbers earlier on Sunday. Matthew Stafford has thrown 30 pick sixes in his career. Eli Manning threw 22, and he somehow managed to win 2 Super Bowls along the way. Matthew Stafford's got a ring, might be a Hall of Famer. And, I'm a little sidetracked here, but the point is all quarterbacks make bad plays at times. They all do boneheaded things. I've seen Russell Wilson make some of the stupidest decisions that a quarterback will ever make. But, and again, I don't want to make an excuse for Daniel Jones, but he said prior to the game that he would not be thinking about his knee, his surgically repaired knee. And that's easy to say, not as easy to do when you're facing players who can actually hit you for the first time since you've undergone a major operation like that. That particular play was the first time that the end zone interception, the first time he was actually about to get hit. Now, he messed up. He should have thrown the ball initially to Theo Johnson, but when he held it, then all of a sudden he's going to get hit. He's in the end zone. He knows he's going to get hit. And I have to wonder if there was a fleeting thought about his knee that entered his mind. And again, I don't want to make an excuse. I don't want to get into his mind, but it would be natural if it did. And it would be natural if that helped cause what was really a horrific play that can't happen in a regular season game, because the Giants just don't have that kind of margin for error.
Yeah. And, I'm sure in the back of his head, he feels the pressure of having to perform this year. I mean, and of course, that's partly his own fault for negotiating as hard as he had his team negotiate for the salary that he got. But nonetheless, regardless, you feel the pressure out there. You know that your leash is not that long. And I do believe his leash is not that long. I think that by mid-season he could be on the bench if he's not showing considerable improvement, and so he feels pressure, right? And so again, I don't take too much from that first quarter. Since he came back and played better in the second quarter, I'm very interested to see how he responds the next time he gets out on the field, whenever that is.
I agree with that. Yeah, it's very interesting. We saw him play one series last preseason. We saw the Giants starters play one series. They drove down the field. I don't even remember who the preseason game was against, but they drove down the field. They went 75 yards for a touchdown. Jones completed a bunch of passes to Darren Waller. They looked like an unstoppable offense. And then we saw what we saw in the regular season. And we've seen teams look miserable in the preseason and have good years. We've seen teams look great in the preseason and have miserable years. When push comes to shove, the game didn't count. To me, the important part was he got out there, he played an entire half, he got hit a few times, he got through it, he got better as the game went along. As I said at Big Blue View in my writing, I mean, if he makes that mistake in a regular season game that ends up costing them a game or making it hard for them to win a game, then you crucify him for it. I'm not going to crucify him for something that happened in a preseason game that doesn't count, especially the first time he's been on the field since tearing that ACL.
Yeah. And the other thing, the additional pressure that's on him now is that the things that were preventing him from playing up to whatever his ceiling is seem to be gone now. I think it's not too early to conclude that Malik Neighbors is the real deal.
No, it's not. No, no, not too early at all.
I mean, I know he hasn't played a regular season game yet, but we've seen nothing to suggest that he's going to be anything but a great receiver in the NFL. And with him as wide receiver 1, then it makes the rest of the group look all that much better, since they're now wide receiver 2, 3, 4, etc., instead of wide receiver 1, 2, 3. And then the other thing is that the offensive line, I don't want to say it's been a pleasant surprise, because I kind of anticipated that things would be better, because they signed veterans who had played at least fairly well in the past. But the line as a whole has looked really good for 2 games now. And, props to Carmen Brasillo and whatever he's doing to make them look cohesive. I think that's the thing. So the things that I think he could rightly claim have been holding him back are gone now. I mean, I think it looks like they're gone. He's got receivers to throw to. He's got an offensive line. It looks like it's going to give him time. He's got a head coach who's considered a great offensive mind and a great play caller, that I think he knows will call plays that will try to put him in situations where he can succeed and attack defenses. And so really, it, in his head, I think he has to realize, now it's really all up to him.
I do think you mentioned the offensive line, and we'll get deeper into that a little bit later. But I do think there were a couple of throws on Saturday where you could see him start to get a little bit antsy, even when there was nobody around him. And I think that it takes time to realize that I'm not going to get hit here. Maybe I'm not going to get hit. I've spent 5 years not being able to find my third read, or without running for my life. And that's a difference. And hopefully you get a little bit more comfortable in the pocket. But you're right. Those excuses, don't look like they're going to be there. And, he knows, everybody knows what's at stake for him this year. If he plays well, if the Giants win enough games, if he is 2022 or better, Daniel Jones, then he gets to stay next year. If he's some facsimile of what he was last year and he continues to make boneheaded plays in games that count, then Carson Beck or Shadur Sanders or Dak Prescott or somebody else is going to be the Giants quarterback next year. I mean, he knows that, and he knows how hard the Giants work to try to actually, find a quarterback of the future this past offseason. So he knows what's at stake in, every time he goes out there.
Yeah. And I mean, realistically for him, he's financially secure. So it's just a matter of his legacy as a football player, right? And his future in the NFL and how he'll feel about his career looking back. He's got the money in the bank already, so he doesn't have to worry about that anymore. And so, really he should at some level be comfortable because of that, and then just go and attack things and do his best, knowing that really all the pieces are in place to enable him to succeed. And if he can't do it, then he just wasn't cut out for it. It's as simple as that.
Absolutely. I do think you mentioned the word attack, and it reminded me of something I wanted to mention. My favorite offensive play from the entire game on Saturday was after the 2 interceptions, after the interception on the deep ball when the Giants had gotten into Texans territory. They took the shot, and Derek Stingley intercepted the ball that was intended for Jalen Hyatt. My favorite play in the entire game was Daboll dialing up another shot play for Jones, who threw, and I don't, there are people who say, oh, the ball was off by a millimeter. It wasn't a perfect throw. It was a half a foot too short, or it would have been a touchdown. That ball was a dropped in the bucket dime. Great throw. Any NFL quarterback would have felt good about it. And I thought that it was terrific play calling by Brian Daboll to give Jones another opportunity at that play.
And this is the actual history of Daniel Jones. When he was a rookie, Pat Shurmur used to dial up long plays for him. Even at the beginning of the Joe Judge era, they would do that. If you remember how the Joe Judge era began, it was 2020, the pandemic year of the NFL, and the Giants' opening game was at home against Pittsburgh, and he threw a 42-yard pass to
Slayton,
Darius.
I think it was. Yes.
And it was a beautiful pass, and Slayton made a beautiful jumping catch in the end zone for a touchdown. The next week in Washington, he goes right back to Slayton with another bomb, but that one was just a little bit too long. Some people blame Jones for throwing a little too long. Some people blame Slayton for not laying out for it or whatever. But anyway, that one wasn't quite completed. And a couple of weeks later in New Orleans, he threw a long bomb to John Ross for a touchdown. And so, things were, or maybe I'm confused. That might have been, maybe that was that 2020 or was that 2021? I don't know. One thing I know is in 2020,
I think it was 2020. Yeah, I think it was 2020, the pandemic year.
In Cincinnati, he was throwing long passes down the sideline to Evan Engram. In Cincinnati, that was the game that he got hurt in, and so they were doing that for a while, and then all of a sudden they just went into a shell and decided they are just not going to risk anything anymore. And after that point in 2021, they just never made him take big shots anymore. It was always, four guys to the sticks, and it drove me crazy watching that offense, because it was an offense I think that no one could really succeed in, and I think it just got into his head that he's not allowed to try the risky plays anymore, and you've got to try the risky plays in order to make the risky plays, and you're going to have some plays that are intercepted, and some of the great quarterbacks get intercepted a lot. I mean, Giants fans love Eli Manning. Well, Eli Manning was not afraid to throw the long pass, and Eli Manning was not afraid to get intercepted, and he got intercepted a lot, right? But you have to have that mindset to attack, and that's the thing that I think, if I can interpret what Daboll was calling in Houston, he was calling an attacking game to try to get him into that mindset, and in addition to seeing whether he can handle it, right? But I think it's also something mental too.
Absolutely. I just a quick aside about Eli Manning. You mentioned Eli, and you're right. He did throw a lot of interceptions, but there was one thing about Eli, and he would admit to this. If the Giants were losing a game, and we know that in the back half of his career, they lost a lot more than they won, in the fourth quarter of games, he would throw balls that he knew were risky, because, and the attitude was, look, we're losing the game anyway. We have to make a play. If it gets intercepted, it doesn't matter. We're losing the game anyway. We're going to lose anyway, unless we make something dramatic happen. And I do think that's where some of Eli's interceptions came from over the years. And, Brett Favre had that attitude of, I'm going to throw it in there and see what happens. And, you don't want interceptions. You don't want turnovers, but when you take more risks, sometimes those risks are rewarded, and sometimes they're not. But that's and I think you're right. I think Daboll wants to attack more, and I think he should attack more. He's finally got weapons to allow him to do that, and he's got an offensive line that looks like it will give the quarterback an opportunity to do that. So, Tony, let's talk about that offensive line a little bit. One of the things, the Giants leaned into veteran offensive linemen this offseason. Jermaine Illuminor, John Runyon, Aaron Stinney, Greg Van Roten. They brought in Carmen Brasillo. people went ballistic when they didn't draft any offensive linemen. But what they did, most NFL offensive line analysts will tell you that it's very difficult on these young offensive linemen. What the Giants did was maybe not bring in the most talented players in the world, but they brought in competent, functional veterans who could play good enough football and, who could handle situations. Jermaine Illuminor can move around. Aaron Stinney can move around. John Runyon can go from right to left. Greg Van Roten can play center. He can play both guard spots. And it hasn't been perfect. They've all had to move around because of injury, but they're a group of offensive linemen who have been through all of that before. And I think that plus Carmen Brasillo's work is really showing up.
Yeah. And, I think that the attitude about the offense, I mean, you always want a great offensive lineman if you can get one, obviously. Okay. I mean, as a Giant, I'm thrilled that Andrew Thomas is there at left tackle for them. I wish Evan Neal had turned into the same thing at right tackle, and that they had to pay him $20+ million a year in a couple of years. You'd always rather have the great players, but realistically, you can't have 5 great offensive linemen across the board. You just can't afford that many. And so there's a level at which an offensive lineman at least becomes effective, so that the quarterback isn't running for his life all the time. And it feels like at least a decent fraction of the time he's going to have time to look for receivers. And by the way, if you want to play an attacking style of offense, then you need time for receivers to get downfield. Okay, you can't play an attacking offense with 5-yard passes all the time, right? So you need time for guys to get open. And I think what we're seeing is that when you get to a certain level of competence and you have good coaching, so that the players are working together and communicating and doing the right things, you can at least potentially have an effective offense. Let's just say that the Giants only scoring 10 points against Houston, I think, had little to nothing to do with the offensive line. They most of them played, I think, very well again yesterday, or at least competently yesterday. And so for now, that might be enough. In the future, another draft comes along, you have the chance maybe to upgrade at one of those positions. Sure, do it. But right now, it looks like they have a line that's going to be good enough to actually allow the offense to function as it's intended to function. And that's really all you can ask for.
Especially the way things have gone the last few years. As I think about this offensive line and I think about the type of players that it has, I'm reminded of that last great Giants offensive line that was considered, for a while to be maybe the best or one of the best in the NFL. There was one great player on that line, Chris Snee, was the only great player. What there was around him was a bunch of hard-nosed, competent NFL players. There was a guy in David Deal who would play whatever position on the line he was asked to play. And I think over time he started everywhere but center for the Giants. And he was not a good left tackle, but he functioned out there. He handled it, and he knew his assignments well enough that offensive line could function. And for me, when I think about that offensive line, the sum of the parts of that offensive line was probably better than the talent of the individuals. And I think that, and 2 preseason games is not enough to draw a full conclusion, obviously. And I'm not going to say that this offensive line will be the equal of that last great Giants offensive line, but that might be the kind of offensive line that we're seeing, where just the veteran sort of selfless nature of these guys, willing to move around, knowing their assignments, being led by a man who seems to be a good coach, could lead this line to be better, better. The sum of its parts could be better than the individual players themselves.
Mm-hmm. And, we won't know until the season starts how good this offensive line really is, because, again, in preseason games, you're not always playing against the other team's starters. I think Houston didn't start many or any of their frontline edge guys and IDL.
I think Andrew Thomas said that the top two Texans edge defenders didn't play, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't pay attention to that. Right. What I was focused on offensive line wise was mostly that these guys knew their assignments, that they picked up their assignments, that when a guy had to move from one side of the line, I think Austin Schlottman had to move at one point from center. He had to come out wide to the left to pick up a rusher. They knew their assignments. They knew who they were supposed to block, and they performed those assignments. And it seems elementary, but it didn't happen last year for the New York Giants.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so again, yes, it's preseason, and you can't really tell how good they, as a group, they are until they get into the regular season. By the way, when they get into the regular season, right off the bat, they get, I guess it's Minnesota and Cleveland the first 2 weeks. So they're going to see some pass rush the first 2 weeks of the regular season.
They get Minnesota, and then they get Washington. But sure. Yes, I get what you're saying.
Right, and then Washington, and then Cleveland after that.
Yeah, right. They will see some. They will see some pass rush.
They will see some pass rush. But anyway, I looked up how the offensive line did last season in the preseason, just for this very reason that you're not necessarily, you're not playing with the same intensity. You're not necessarily playing the starting guys coming at you from the defense during the preseason game. So I looked to see what the Giants offensive line did in the preseason last year, and in PFF's grading system, in both pass blocking and run blocking for the preseason, they graded in the mid to upper 30s, which is a terrible, terrible, terrible grade. So, we could have gone into last season already being extremely worried that the offensive line was not going to hold up, because they were already playing poorly in the preseason. And of course, it didn't take long once the season started to realize, oh, this really is a problem. So it took one quarter of the opening game against Dallas to realize how bad things really were. This season, for what it's worth, the offensive line, the starting guys are grading kind of in the 60s, a couple of them in the 70s, and so on and so forth. And so this line is performing in preseason games significantly better than last season's line was performing in preseason games. And so there's some hope, I think, that once the bell really rings, that this group will at least do a credible job of allowing the offense to function.
And I think everybody would settle for that.
Yeah.
Tony, let's talk about the fact that we're entering the final week of the preseason. We have joint practice coming up against the Jets on Wednesday, and hopefully no punches will be thrown. And we'll hopefully Malik Neighbors just, if he doesn't catch a ball, hopefully he just walks away. Or maybe the better idea would be for him to just catch everything thrown to him instead of missing one.
That's right.
But, we've got the last preseason game coming up on Saturday, also against the Jets, which is one of those weird Jets home games in MetLife Stadium when the Giants are the visiting team. But the point is, we've got roster cuts coming up in just a little bit more than a week. And I have been spending part of the weekend putting together my latest 53-man roster projection. That'll be up at Big Blue View on Monday morning. So it might be up by the time you guys see this. But that's not easy to do, Tony. And it's not that this is such a talented roster that they're cutting so many NFL caliber players, which would be a really nice problem to have. I mean, that might be the case at a couple positions like wide receiver, but I find this roster very, very difficult to figure out, just because there's competitions like cornerback where I don't have a clue. I don't think they do either, because no one has stepped up and grabbed a job. There's competitions like linebacker, like defensive tackle for depth spots, wide receiver. So, but in a lot of these spots, to me, it's like no one has really stepped up and grabbed a job. So how do you actually, configure the roster? Plus, I think they had, what do they got? Like 12 or 13 guys, I think, that came up, after Saturday's game, I think, with some form of an injury. And who knows how many of those are long-term enough to impact the season opening 53.
Yeah, and so I think there's two different dynamics going on. I think that you mentioned one of them at cornerback, where I just look at the guys they have and say who's CB1, who's CB2. CB1 is supposed to be Tay Banks, but to be honest, I don't think we've seen him do much in the preseason. And I think last year he got off to a good start, but then started to get taken advantage of as the season went on. And so I feel like Tay Banks has something to prove this year about whether he actually is a CB1 or not. And again, he's gonna get his chance, because he'll probably see Justin Jefferson in game
Yeah.
one.
What I before you move on, what I worry about with Tay Banks, it has nothing to do with physical skills and physical ability and athleticism and all that. What I worry about with Tay Banks is everybody's got incredible physical skills at the NFL level, at wide receiver and corner. It's about just developing that understanding and that knowledge, and really understanding what receivers and quarterbacks and offenses are trying to do to you. And some guys actually know how to do that. Some guys are able to do that. I don't know if Tay Banks is going to be able to really take that step to translate all of those physical gifts and be able to actually use them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is, I think, a big year for him. And again, cornerbacks don't always shine right away. I mean, the case of someone like, say, Sauce Gardner, who walked onto an NFL field and immediately became one of the top 3 cornerbacks in the league, if not the best one, right? I think that's more the exception than the rule. You look at the guy we saw yesterday, Derek Stingley, who I guess was drafted one spot before Sauce Gardner. Is that right? I can't remember.
Think so. Yeah, I think so. I think he went 3 and Sauce went 4.
Right, and Sauce went 4. Derek Stingley had a mediocre, I think at best, rookie year for Houston, but he came on in his second year and improved a lot. And I think now he's considered a really good cornerback. So he's somebody who developed. He's someone who started out with all the hype in college, and then as his college career went on, these problems started to surface and everything like that, and his stock went down a little bit. And I think people were surprised that Houston took him as high as number 3 when Sauce was there. But he's looking like a pretty good cornerback now in the NFL. So there are guys that it takes a year or two for them to develop, and you just have to hope that Tay Banks is one of those guys, because at the other cornerback position, I have no idea who the Giants should be starting at that position, and whether they have someone on the roster who truly is a starting cornerback quality player that's already a Giant. And that makes me very nervous. But the flip side of this question of what the 53 is going to look like is, you go to other positions on the roster, and the one that comes to mind for me, for example, is running back, where naturally, the big thing was losing Saquon Barkley, but the Giants have basically never had good depth under Barkley. Maybe one other guy who could be an effective running back for you. Wayne Gallman was a good running back for the Giants, for example. But I look at what the Giants have now, and assuming that Singletary is the clear number 1 back, they've got 3 guys behind him who have all shown flashes that they can be NFL players, and they all have kind of some kind of juice, I think, that they bring to the running back position. And I don't know whether all four of those guys are going to make the 53. I mean, in this day and age where passing is king, I don't know whether teams keep four running backs anymore. I guess if you are an important member of special teams, then you manage to stay as the fourth running back or something like that. But the Giants have three young running backs who all look like they have something to offer as they develop, and so that's a position now that looks to me actually kind of deep compared to what it has been in recent years. Offensive line is starting to look a little deep to me now because they have other guys that they can plug in. As you say, Aaron Stinney came in, yesterday, and he played all right. He's okay. So Azudo has looked good in preseason. Then again, maybe he was just another guy who needed the right coaching. I don't.
I think when it comes to Josh Azudu, look at Jermaine Illuminor. Look at a guy like Greg Van Roten. Look at a lot of these guys. Aaron Stinney's another one. So there's three guys that the Giants brought in. None of these guys played much at the beginnings of their careers. Yeah. It took all of these guys several years to become what they are now, to become, capable, quality veteran players. And the only thing I will say about Josh Azudu is the Giants seem to be convinced that he can play left and right tackle in the NFL. I'm still not. But the Giants have actually been fair to him this year because he has practiced every single practice going all the way back to the spring. He has been at one of the tackle spots. He's played a little bit inside at guard. Last year, they threw him in at left tackle, basically with no reps at tackle in the spring, no reps at tackle in training camp or preseason games. They just out of the blue, all of a sudden decided that he was the swing tackle. And he was completely unprepared for that role a year ago. And I think that I hate to put it this way, but I think they set him up to fail a year ago. And this year, I think they've been much more fair to him in terms of preparing him to have a chance.
Yeah. I would still like to see the Giants bring back Tyree Phillips, because somebody that I think we know can handle that position of swing tackle. But again, the point is they do have options now, and we didn't mention Schlotman, who came in and actually played well yesterday after they took John Michael Schmitz out. They only let Schmitz play 14, 15 snaps, and then Schlotman played the rest of the way, and he played fairly well. So they're actually getting kind of deep on the offensive line, even though they only have one star player. You mentioned wide receiver. I think they have a very deep wide receiver room now. I mean, back in 2022, we were talking about guys at the end of the roster like David Sills and Marcus Johnson and players like that. Now we're talking about guys like Allen Robinson and Isaiah Hodgins at the end of the wide receiver roster. And whether both of them will or one of them will make the team. And so that's another area in which they've developed considerable depth. I think the Giants are still lacking star power, right? They have some of it, but I think that compared to other teams, the Giants still have a shortage of people at the very top who are excellent at their positions. They don't have that one clear Pro Bowl level cornerback or safety. They don't have that. I don't want to say anything about Neighbors before he's played a real game. I mean, he looks to me like he'll fill the bill at wide receiver. Obviously, they don't have anyone at quarterback who most people would classify as a top quarterback, right. and so on. But they're slowly developing, I think, quality depth at a number of the positions, and maybe that will make them a little bit more unaffected by injury at some positions than they have been in the past.
Absolutely. When it comes to the roster, Tony, let me ask you, are you a 2 quarterback guy or a 3 quarterback guy on this roster? I have had such a hard time justifying keeping Tommy DeVito on the roster. up to this point. But are you a keep DeVito on the roster guy?
I'm a 3-quarterback guy. Definitely. I say keep DeVito. The reason, well, first of all, I mean, DeVito has shown that he's competent. Okay. I mean, he's right. Okay. I mean, he can run the offense. Do I wish we still had Tyrod Taylor on the roster? Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
But the fact is that the NFL is a passing league, and NFL defenses are geared to get to the quarterback. And as we've seen in how many consecutive years now, quarterbacks go down with injuries, right? And people immediately think of Daniel Jones when I say that, and that's certainly true. But you look at last year when Jones went down, and then Taylor replaced him, and he went down the first game he was
I
in.
think
That's
I
when
think
DeVito had to come in.
60 some quarterbacks started games in the NFL
Yeah.
a year ago. It's crazy.
Yeah, and even thinking back to 2022, when you'd say that they didn't really have that problem in 2022, but even in 2022, there was the Bears game where Jones went down with an injury and they brought Tyrod Taylor in, and a few plays later, Tyrod went down with an injury and they didn't have a QB3.
Right.
Therefore,
And
that game,
Saquon ended up taking some snaps.
Barkley wound up taking some snaps, right? And so,
And then they put Jones back in the game just to hand the ball off.
yeah. So I think about situations like that, and maybe the Giants are just snake bit, but I think it's the nature of the NFL. The NFL is a quarterback-driven league, and on defense, it's a league that's driven by get to the quarterback. And I think having 3 guys on the 53 is a better long-term strategy.
I will spill this part of my 53-man roster projection. I did this week for the first time keep DeVito on the roster. I went with the 3 quarterbacks, and I will tell you what really finally convinced me to do that was the fact that when Drew Lock got hurt, the Giants considered the idea of bringing in a 3rd quarterback. And I went and I looked at what was available in the 3rd quarterback market. And we're talking about the Matt Barkleys and Jacob Easons and Ben DiNucci's of the world, the guys who we know can't play at the NFL level at this point in their careers. And it's not going to get a whole lot better after roster cuts are made in terms of what's going to become available. And when I thought about it, I think it's very unlikely that the Giants would be able to pass Tommy DeVito to the practice squad. It would be great if they could, because the new NFL rule allows you to activate a practice squad quarterback to have that 3rd guy available for games, an unlimited number of times. So you can activate that practice squad quarterback every single week.
Yeah.
But I think just the reality of looking at it, I don't think the Giants get Tommy DeVito to the practice squad. And considering that he's got 2 years in the system and what we've seen from DeVito, I don't think they could do better for a number 3 quarterback or as well for a number 3 quarterback. So I think you almost have to keep him on the roster. So that spill that little bit of
right. And I mean, so there's a lot of laughter about DeVito because of all the stuff and Italian American heritage stuff that he brought and so on. But when you get rid of all of that stuff, which is irrelevant, and just talk about football, you say, okay, yes, he's a limited quarterback, and that showed when he started against New Orleans, and he just couldn't figure out the New Orleans defense and was just unable to move the ball against that defense. At the same time, he beat Green Bay on Monday Night Football. And he did it not by having the defense win the game for them, but by getting the ball back and driving them downfield for the winning score after he had thought that he had the game sealed with a long run by Barkley, where Barkley fumbled the ball and let Green Bay return it almost for a touchdown, and then they eventually got the go-ahead score. And so he's shown that he can play in the NFL. I'm not saying I think he's a starter quality NFL quarterback
But he
at this
belongs
time,
in the league. He belongs in the league.
yeah. And he threw a bunch of touchdown passes against Washington in his first start and so on. So
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the off-field stuff I think affects people's view of him. And then the other thing that affects people's view of him was the first time he ever saw NFL action when Dable had to throw him into the Jets game after Tyrod Taylor got hurt.
Right. And didn't trust him, obviously.
Didn't trust him to do anything. So other than like one or two passes, he just had him run the ball the entire game, which
Mhm.
that's why I think that
But
image of DeVito is
he
seared into people's minds. But he can do some stuff.
I don't think DeVito mania per se is ever going to return the way that it did, but he gives you an opportunity to function. And if you're down to your third quarterback, then that's not bad at all.
Right.
So, but we know Elijah Chapman's making the team, though. We know that much after Saturday. We know he's making the team. That he's so much fun.
I saw something today that he reached something like 16.8 miles per hour on that play where he ran 45 yards downfield and caught the running back, J.J. Taylor.
He was trucking.
He was motoring. I mean,
yes, he had a little bit of an angle on that guy, but he was trucking.
Yeah. I mean, if I had that same angle on a guy, I couldn't run that fast to track him.
No.
I'm not 278 pounds or whatever weight he is.
He's so much fun, and I have to tell you, they list him. I think they list him in the program at 6 foot. He's not 6 foot. He admits he's not 6 foot, and I know he's not 6 foot because I've stood next to him. He admits that he's 5'11" at best. And I do have to laugh. He's so strong. I mean, Rakeem Nunez-Roches, Nacho. I asked Nacho about Chapman a week or so ago. And he said, everybody knows I love to lift and I can lift a lot of weight and all this and that and the other thing. And he says, I walk in the room and they go over to the bench press and whatever. And he says, Chapman's warming up at 315 pounds. Mm-hmm. He says, it takes me a while to get there, but he's warming up at 315.
Yeah. And so, you just watch him and he's just very impressive. I mean, I think there's no question he's making a 53.
Oh yeah. And he's justifiably becoming a fan favorite. Anyway, Tony, I think that's a good place for us to call it a day. Appreciate the time. Giants fans, we'll be out at the Nick Filato and I will be out at the joint practice with the Jets on Wednesday. So you guys hopefully will look forward to our coverage of that. And as always,
with the don't get into any fights with the Jets reporters.
Can I punch Connor Hughes just for the heck of it? I can't do that. I can't do that. Just because, just for no reason. But no, I don't think we'll do that. We have to play nice because I'm told the Jets put on a nice spread when it comes to feeding the media. So we'll play.
That.
No, we can't jeopardize that. So we'll play nice. All right. Thank you, Tony, for the time and the insight as always. Giants fans, thank you for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.